The telecom industry has funded so many shoddy studies. UC Berkeley in 2010 did a review of all the industry funded studies and were like, these are inadequate. These are studies that are not even using real cell phones for their studies. They're using simulated frequencies.
That's another thing that I was reading, was that there was a study that was based on these EMFs and heart cancer in, I think it was mice or something. And that was, they were exposed to, were they exposed to like 5G or was it 4G, or do you know what that one was?
Yeah, it's the National Toxicology Program.
Okay.
They ran a multi-year study, spent $25 million to, there's been a lot of studies where people spend a lot of money on
Right.
this. And this is a government agency coming from the, Department of Human Health and Services. And they looked at, it was 2G and 3G frequencies and modulated signals, which is, again, we can talk about what 5G actually is, but we still use a lot of those same signals. So it's very much indicative of the cell phone exposure. I think it was for a normal amount of time per day, like 10, 12 hours. And there was clear evidence of tumors in the hearts of male rats. There was some evidence of tumors in the brains and another area of the body. And that was the conclusion. And then guess what happened? Nothing. They just cut the funding and no follow-up studies. There's so many, conflicting media articles published on that.
Yeah.
And that's just one that's happened so many times. People are always like, the studies are inconclusive. But guess what's happened over the last 20 to 30 years? The telecom industry has funded so many shoddy studies. So
Really?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So many. This is, I think, the worst industry where this occurs. And there's people like Dr. Henry Lai, who from University of Washington, put together these comprehensive reviews. He literally has a Google Drive of thousands of studies where he's tried to filter out. And one of the first reviews he put together, he did 350 studies, and he found, I think it was 55 to 60% showed harmful biological effects. It was kind of almost 50-50. But then when he subdivided them into who was funded independently and who was funded by industry, it was 70% of the independent studies showed harmful biological effects, and 25 to 30% funded by industry showed harmful biological effects. And then more and more people did the same thing, and they found the same conclusions. UC Berkeley in 2010 did a review of all the industry funded studies and were like, these are inadequate. These are studies that are not even using real cell phones for their studies. They're using simulated frequencies. So it's insane and
geared to get better results, right?
Of course, because what is the worst outcome for the telecom industry? And we're talking, the OG ones like Motorola and now Verizon, AT&T, and of course the big tech, device companies.
Yeah.
But really the telecom giants. This could really hamper, and it's happened since the 90s. That Dr. Henry Lai guy in 2006 found that radio frequency cell phone exposure causes DNA strand breaks. And then Motorola went on this smear campaign and was like, no, that's inconclusive.
What was the name of this? It was called what again?
Dr. Henry Lai, L-A-I.
Henry Lai, and then how would we find that on the internet? Just type in DNA strands.
Yeah, DNA strand break or EMF exposure.
Okay.
Summary. And the reason why you've never heard this or no one's talking about this is so many of these researchers basically got canceled. So everyone, like Alan Frey, funding pulled. There was Milton Zaret before him in the 60s was proving that EMFs cause cataracts. That was the first known.
Cataracts?
Cataracts was the first known side effect of EMFs besides thermal, increasing the temperature of your body. And then it was actually testicular damage in the 60s as well, which they covered up. They both got canceled. Robert O. Becker, Andrew Marino, they went on 60 Minutes, or Robert O. Becker did. They got canceled. Henry Lai's research has shown that exposure to a 60 hertz magnetic field at intensities of 0.1 to 0.5 millitesla for 2 hours can cause an increase in DNA single and double strand breaks in brain cells of rats. So, okay, what would a 60 hertz magnetic field in the 0.1 to 0.5 millitesla range be equivalent to in the real world? So that's 60 hertz is power frequency. So that's what's coming out of your outlet. That's, so what's that? 100 milligauss. That's probably being 6 to 12 inches away from your power outlet, like pretty close, maybe even
So
closer.
like where I'm sleeping in my bedroom.
Yeah, you'd have to be really close to it or live very close to like high voltage transmission line. Okay. The more damning one for me is one that even goes further back, is actually that there's a statistically significant increased risk of childhood leukemia at 4 milligauss. So that's, like 100 times lower.
What is a milligauss?
A milligauss is just another measure of power flux density, which is magnetic field. So if I converted that.
So they found out that childhood leukemia rates were, how did they do that? How do they measure this?
It was epidemiological research, like correlative data, but it was reproduced. So it's actually a crazy story what happened, because there was, and it comes back to Robert O. Becker as well. So basically, the Navy was trying to build this antenna in Michigan and then Wisconsin for submarine communication. And that was called Project Sanguine. Eventually, like they renamed it 4 times because the public kept freaking out about it. Because the Navy asked Robert O. Becker and a few other scientists to review the current research on low frequency EMFs and their biological impact. And they looked at that time in the 70s at the existing research, and they concluded that there were potential harmful effects, mostly from, power line data. And yeah, there's some correlative stuff.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm distracted. And they recommended that the Navy, not proceed forward or, proceed with caution, because there was existing evidence that showed low frequency EMFs could be harmful to biology. Although the Navy's antenna they wanted to build was like thousands of times lower intensity than all the power lines and the exposure to power lines. And then the Navy kind of covered that up. They didn't tell anybody. And then they just were like, yeah, this is safe. And then Robert O. Becker went on 60 Minutes and like made this big public outcry about it. And, then the public kind of was freaked out. So they boycotted it, got moved to Wisconsin, etc. And then Robert O. Becker went back to his home state of New York and started, petitioning against this new power line project that was going to be built because he thought it would be unsafe based on the distance that they were putting into it. And he started doing his own studies on rats, and they found some, multi-generational issues with birth rates and health concerns in rats. And then someone from North Carolina, I think her name was Nancy Wertheimer or something, came out and it said 4 milligauss is like a threshold for statistically significant increased risk of childhood leukemia because of proximity to transmission lines. Then the New York State Power Lines Project were like, we're going to fund a study. It's going to be like $20 million to disprove it. They had this whole thing. And then guess what? They came up with the same result. They actually
admitted it?
They admitted it. And then you know what they said? They said, well, it's too late. We're going to set the safety threshold to 100 milligauss because the public has already taken this safety concern. That's their problem. And then nothing happened.
Jesus Christ.
That was in the late 70s. Yeah, I think I had it in my notes somewhere here of everything that happened. Yeah, Nancy's study at only 3 milligauss is in 1979. The utility-funded study was in 1987, which confirmed her results. And then they were like, yeah, sorry, the public has accepted this risk. And then there was guys in the 90s, this guy R.P. Liberty, that showed more studies for 60 hertz fields proliferating cancer cells, suppressing melatonin. And then the New York Times said that this guy made up his results, even though he graphed one table slightly incorrect. The results were totally fine. So a lot of every decade there has been a massive EMF debate, and nobody knows about this. Most of the literature I'm reading, I wish I could have sent you more stuff. It's all from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And then so you just have to apply that today. Well, because first off, the power transmission exposure is exactly the same. Nothing has changed. We still have 60 hertz.
We have the same exact power lines.
We have the same exact power. But guess what? We have we
have 5G towers everywhere.
Yeah, but we also have way more stuff just plugged in and powered.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, we have wireless technology.